I'd like to take this opportunity very briefly to thank the Atlantic Council and the terrific team that put this together. Not just for what you've done here, but what the Atlantic Council does throughout the world is wonderful. Also to the World Government Summit, and ultimately to our host nation here, United Arab Emirates. I can't help but note that at NASA, we have failed to sustain a beyond low Earth orbit human spaceflight program since Apollo. We failed every time. Not only has failure been an option, it's been a certainty for beyond LEO human spaceflight. And I'm not exactly young anymore. I haven't seen a human go to the moon. And no program had gone from one administration to another until Artemis. We have a unique opportunity to build the broadest and most diverse global human spaceflight program in history with the Artemis program. And as a founding member of the Artemis Accords, United Arab Emirates helped transform that dream into reality. And now, going beyond being a member of the Accords, the airlock, the very gateway to the moon, is being built by UAE. So thank you, UAE, for hosting this conference and for your commitment to the vision and the dream of humanity on the moon. So with that as a preface, let's turn to Kevin and talk about why the moon? Why is going back to the moon so significant for our nations and the world, Kevin?
Well, humans are naturally explorers, and the moon is an obvious next step to return to do different things on the moon, to learn different things about the moon, and then use it as a stepping stone to Mars and elsewhere in the solar system. One of the things I'll say right up front is that what I worry about is, as we talk about the moon, and I'm hearing this narrative on Mars as well, we're all enthusiasts of returning to the moon permanently, sustainably. We have early ideas about getting to Mars. There's a counter-narrative that's emerging that says, boy, it's difficult to get these human bodies into space, and it's so difficult that maybe we should forego that vision. Okay, I think that's deadly, quite frankly. And so we want to keep that human aspect of why we're returning to the moon and Mars firmly in the center of the story.
Yeah, always beware of false dichotomies. It isn't human spaceflight or robotics,
Exactly.
It's human spaceflight and robotics.
Right.
We're always stronger together.
That's right.
And speaking of being stronger together, representing the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs, or can I still say new director already? Or getting there, a new director. Again, such an important role ANUSA has in uniting the world as we take these next steps to the moon. Same question, Artie, why the moon? Why is it important, particularly to ANUSA and the United Nations?
You can say new as long as you like. I'm going to milk the grace period for as long as I can, especially coming from industry. Look, this is a fascinating time for us to be going back to the moon. We have a massive challenge ahead of us, though, when we think about the moon. We really do. We arguably have a clean sheet. We have not yet done to the moon what we have done to the Earth and its orbits, which both need serious cleaning up, as we know. We also have a really important operational imperative right now with all of the missions that are planned to the moon. So I think there's a chance for us to really get ahead of the game in a way that we could not. We can foresee the need for this. We had to learn the hard way with Earth, but we have an opportunity to really do it right, and there's still a lead time with that. So I hope that we will leverage the convening power of the United Nations and wisdom from what we've learned here to do it right now.
Wonderful. And let's go from the United Nations to a very important nation when it comes to the moon. Sharif, if you'll forgive me, I can't talk to an Egyptian about the moon without mentioning the name Farouk El-Baz.
Yes.
Just an absolute hero, really in many ways the godfather of remote sensing, who trained the initial Apollo astronauts on geology and really helped move us from test pilots to scientists for the first time. Wonderful person. It's been my pleasure to meet with him a couple of times when I was at NASA and at Redwire. So given that incredible history in Egypt, I'm just curious, what's your country's perspective on going to the moon, why it's significant? What does it mean for the Egyptian Space Agency and the Egyptian people?
Yeah, actually, if you consider the concept of going to the moon, it's quite important given the substantial materials there and the presence of oxygen, silicon, all the important elements there. And as a natural extension to the Earth, it's considered as a seventh continent. However, I think there should be lots of governance and policies that control how we're going to the moon, and how can this be accessed equitably with no discrimination, regardless of the scientific level, regardless of the this is a developing country or a well-developed country. I think this should be taken seriously into consideration, and we need to learn from all our experiences in accessing space when we start to reconsider accessing the moon. And avoiding having lots of silos that everyone will decide in a certain group what they're going to do without having a common consensus about the global users for the moon. So this will guarantee the equal access, will guarantee no appropriation for the moon, and so forth. Considering Egypt, we are a relatively new country in accessing space. However, we started to do some focus on how can we serve our sustainable development goals within the country through space. And moon would be part of that. So we need to deploy the technologies that we adopted inside Egypt to have that adapted to the moon in a very rational way. So for instance, the remote sensing mechanisms that we are developing for our satellites might be also deployed to the moon for understanding the morphology, the nature of the surface of the moon, the type of materials, the climate there, so to give some insight and to complement this with some, let's say, research and some graduate studies that we support there. So that's how we look for the moon as part of the space activities that we are doing in a very modest and very rational way.
Thank you, Sharif. And I would be remiss if I didn't also thank you for chairing the COPUS. For those of you who don't know, the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. I can say conversations are robust, they're never simple, and it's not easy. But if we are going to go to the moon in a safe, sustainable, and peaceful fashion, it will be because of the good work of the COPUS, of ANUSA. So thank you for taking that one on. I owe you dinner sometime for getting that done. So we appreciate it. Moving from government to commercial, Ron, obviously the moon is at the very center of what iSpace is doing. So if you could talk about why the moon is important to you and to the company and to commercial, but maybe even as an astronaut, why it's important to you personally as well.
Well, I'm old enough to have, witnessed the first footsteps on the moon from 250,000 miles away.
You look younger than me, Ron.
Well, that was one of my most vivid childhood memories. And, I always wanted to be a part of that group of explorers that was able to step off the planet and look back on ourselves. And so it's still a dream of mine.
Did that inspire you to be an astronaut?
It did. It did inspire me, exactly. As far as why the moon and iSpace, I think the reason can be summed up in 6 words. Our motto at iSpace, which is expand the planet, expand our future. And that goes back to what everybody has just talked about. If the moon, if we expand out the ecosystem, the market, the commercial sphere of influence, the human sphere of influence to encompass the moon and basically create the Earth's 8th continent, that is going to put us on a different course. That will be a major course correction to the trajectory of humanity, and one that I think will benefit all. And so the purpose of iSpace, our mission, is to create infrastructure on the moon, both on the moon, on the lunar surface and lunar orbit, and a transportation system between the Earth and our closest neighbor, the moon, so that we can enable a permanent, significant human presence on the moon. And so we're starting with the mobility piece. We've got 3 different versions of our landers. We have rovers that we're developing. We are a global company because collaboration is at the heart of everything that we do. And we realize that it can't be one company or one nation. We need to collaborate with everybody. So our headquarters is in Japan, in Tokyo. We have iSpace Europe in Luxembourg, and then the U.S. subsidiary is based in Denver, headquartered in Denver. And together, that's what we're seeking to do. And so we want to be a leader. That is our goal. That is our intention. That is what keeps us going every day and keeping us motivated to provide the lowest cost, the most reliable, the best customer service, the best customer experience, to be able to do this repeatedly over and over, transfer cargo, scientific experiments to the lunar orbit and to the lunar surface, and to do that in a way that enables economies of scale and it enables things to take off. And we truly believe that, if we just rely on governments, right, then we're on a linear path, right? We'll get there someday, maybe. But if we really want to create a significant human presence on the moon, if we really want to make use of the resources that are on the moon, the benefits that are on the moon, then we need to have exponential growth. And the only way we're going to have exponential growth is we enable commercial markets to do that, to assist.
We talk about the false dichotomies. I believe the other false dichotomy is the old question, is it government or is it commercial? Yeah. The answer is both. We must move forward together. And the second golden age of space that we're experiencing is a result of that. I mean, even Elon Musk has been quite explicit. If it wasn't for NASA and DARPA, there wouldn't be a SpaceX. Right. None of that would be occurring. So excited to see us working together, and the international nature of space. That one of the wonderful things about space is the way it brings us together as all of humanity. As you describe, even at iSpace, it's Japan, it's Europe, it's the US. I know it makes conference calls difficult, but it's well worth it. So, while I love humanity coming together, we do tend to have our problems and our disputes, and that's what NUSA and the United Nations is for, to help us overcome those. And when I was at NASA working on the Artemis Accords, we really viewed the Accords as a preemptive strike against conflict. That at heart, we wanted to avoid the problems we have on Earth, on the Moon, on Mars, and in the stars. So, Artie, if I can begin with you. In terms of lunar governance, the rules of the road, what do you see as the biggest challenges as humanity moves forward to the Moon?
I think the biggest risk would be a failure to establish norms, especially when we have such an enormous operational imperative to do so. I mean, we can see what's happening, we can see the excitement around this, and if we allow countries to just do as they please, before we know it, we will be playing catch-up to clean up around the moon and on the moon. I just come from Saudi Arabia. There was a conference on space debris, and somebody actually said, we have to decide what we do with the junk in space. Maybe we don't bring it down to Earth, maybe we put it on the moon. And I was quite taken aback by that statement. I thought, gosh. So I think the biggest risk really is a failure to establish norms, and secondly, a failure to do so with global coordination through COPUS. I think a fragmented approach will not serve us well at all. It will potentially give rise to conflict. I've just come out of my first COPUS session, I realize it's very much like being SG of an association. The relationship with individual members, in this case member states, is so critical, and they share with you their concerns, which they will not share in plenary. And let me be very open. I heard from one member state that they thought that people were being invited to sign on to the Accords on condition that they would no longer work with that member state. And that's false.
Yeah, it's just not true.
Right, but you see how the lack of communication, the lack of open, constructive dialogue around these important issues actually puts massive obstacles in the path of achieving consensus, where in fact everybody is pulling in the same direction. Everybody does want consensus, but perception becomes reality. So I think we have an opportunity. We have an opportunity to really develop the norms and the guidelines that we need. We need to learn the lessons from what has happened on Earth, and also learn lessons from the numerous missions that have succeeded or not succeeded. in terms of what are obstacles have they encountered, what were the experiences, what challenges did they face. I think all of that should inform the creation of norms, and that by definition, by looking at what we've seen, is both coming from the government sector and from private initiatives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, instead of the moon for debris, I recommend New Jersey. That's a personal opinion, but we'll see. And as you say, communication is key, and that's the spine of the Accords is transparency, to avoid those miscommunications. And I think, it would be wonderful a country such as Egypt that has signed the ILRS would also sign the Accords and show that there's common ground, continuity between these visions. So, because the idea of the Accords was to unite countries, not separate them, and bring everyone together to avoid the problems that you're talking about. So congratulations on surviving your first COPUOS meeting. And speaking of the COPUOS, Mr. Chair, you've heard some of the challenges that she's already facing. You're the leader now of the priorities for space governance, and as you look at what could be accomplished, what you might want accomplished, what are your priorities going to be for space governance at the COPUOS?
Yeah, I think there are all the different pending issues in COPUOS now, starting from the moon governance and the things related to the dark and quiet skies, and there are lots of different pending topics now, and actually this might also require some reorganization within the way COPUOS is operated, just to get back its efficiency. So when it was initially established in 1959 with 18 members, the mode of operation hasn't changed over those more than 60 years. And I think now, with 102 countries involved in the committee, things might be reconsidered to have a much more efficient way for running the committee. And I think this will help us to get all the resolutions, and it will also keep the spirit of COPUOS, and it will keep the way of consensus of getting decisions, and it will ensure the equal access for space, which is very important, with no discrimination, having access to everyone, safe and peaceful. So this is the main thing, and avoiding the small bodies and the small silos that are getting. If you look at the moon, also there are lots of foundations and small committees and small silos that's being created now, and they have their own principles and their own ideas about how to run. So all of this should come back to COPUOS, and then a general governance and a general regulations that can govern the whole thing should come out of COPUOS, so that we ensure that everyone have an equal access to space, and we ensure the proper way space should be used as it's designed since 1959. So I think that's what we need to move forward, which is very, very challenging, but I think with what Arti is doing, it will move much more smoother.
No, well put, sir, and I appreciate your reference to the spirit of COPUOS, that despite the challenges, we can find ways to come together, move forward. So thank you in advance for your service to the COPUOS. Ron, one of the greatest threats beyond space debris to commercial activities is uncertainty. Right. It's anathema to investment, to development. And as we look at the state of regulatory regimes in America, globally, there is a fair amount of that. And just wondering if you could talk a little bit about the dangers of uncertainty and maybe how you'd like to get some certainty in the future.
Yeah, I think the biggest threat to the commercial enterprise in space is ambiguity of governance, ambiguity of regulations. As you said, it restricts investment, right? Space is already a challenging investment because the return on investment is longer than most investors want to make. And so we need to do everything we can to encourage the stability that's required to enable folks to make long-term investments. And that is to make sure that we have not no regulation. We need regulation, but we need regulation that is going to be a catalyst to the commercial sector, a catalyst to taking off on that exponential path that we talked about. Because otherwise, every single thing that occurs in space will require government resources to do that. Every government has its budgets and it has its limitations, but once you inject into that equation the commercial sector, then things can really take off. So we need certainty in regulations, even if they're restrictive. I mean, investors would rather have restrictive regulations that they know are stable, that they can work through, work around, figure out how to get innovative and make it work in the environment that they're in. But the scariest thing for an investor is not knowing what that environment is going to be, not knowing what they're going to face a year from now or 6 months from now or 10 years from now. And so I think the more we can do that, the more that we can do that as a global community. For instance, resource ownership. We know that you can't own the moon, but there's a lot of disagreement on whether you can own resources on the moon, right? And so if we do simple things like that, not that that's easy to do, but it should be somewhat simple to decide, what is that governance? That's going to encourage that investment that we need to take off.
Give A.R.D. Sharif a couple weeks, we'll get it all resolved in the COPUS. No problem, Ron.
Can I say one thing on that?
Please, Kevin.
I just wanted to say that I said it in the earlier panel. This is exactly why constant dialogue with industry about what is going on is critical. You brought private industry into the COPUS session in the most extensive way we've seen. That's a very good thing, because the knowledge that exists on the government side and the industry side is typically out of balance. And in the space business, which sometimes has a conservative philosophy behind it historically, people in government will say, well, gee, that's an interesting idea, but I can't let you know if you can do it until I think about it for a very long while. The market will move a lot faster than that. And so that dialogue will be very, very important.
The challenge with the global and the domestic regime is that there isn't a place for the commercial space industry officially.
That's right.
And again, we appreciate our international efforts, the domestic efforts to integrate commercial space. And as you pointed out in the previous panel, Kevin, the government is no longer the experts. It's actually the companies that know more about the operations, more about the technology than the government regulators. And that forces a paradigm shift that is difficult but necessary. And speaking of difficult but necessary, let's keep going with you, Kevin.
Hey.
So in your previous position as Director of Commerce, it's rare I compliment a regulator, but you were one of the good ones, Kevin. Always trying to get us there. And if I could raise two issues relative to lunar governance: one, frequency. How do we deal with that? And the challenges of the space industry when we've always been secondary to telecom. And two, mission authorization, the Article 6 issue. How do you see us dealing with those two topics, and what do you think a positive path forward would be?
So let me go to the second part of the question first, because I think it's very important. And it speaks to exactly what we're talking about, which is, as people bring new concepts forward, understanding how much emphasis, how much financing is behind those ideas, and the likelihood that they will happen. Again, we often talk about the space economy as kind of a giant whole, but you have to dive deep in each of the vertical segments to understand what's really going on. And so on mission authorization, how do I give the entrepreneur a fighting chance when security and safety interests are also at stake? It doesn't mean that we dismiss those. We simply have to find a way to bring those together to authorize activities going forward to encourage innovation and not to hinder it. This has been a 3-administration cause in the United States. We worked a lot on it when I was at Commerce. The current administration actually has done some work in this as well. We actually have to close on a framework that allows people to try things in space as opposed to hold them back. On the spectrum issues, obviously, I think the broader point on the spectrum issues is that we have a chance, and RT referred to this, we have a chance to think ahead of the problems at this point. We have the clean sheet or a near clean sheet at this point about the moon. The spectrum issues, the ITU's initiatives on the spectrum issues, those are very positive because we get to work in advance of having the real problems to deal with. Spectrum is going to be complicated on the moon just like it is everywhere else, and so we're going to have to work within the established forums to actually drive consensus on how we move. The terrestrial versus space issue is a very important one. We're going to need to continue to lobby for more access to spectrum in space for the space community.
Wonderful. We've got our work cut out for us. Sharif, if I can turn to you, what's so wonderful about the second golden age of space, it's not just more commercial, it's more international. If we go back to Apollo, it was a dyad with US, Soviet Union. Now it's multilateralism. The Artemis program is designed to be the broadest, most diverse human spaceflight program in history. China leading ILRS, also very broad, trying to sign up international partners, including Egypt. Could you perhaps talk a little bit about the way Egypt views international cooperation, the benefits of that international cooperation, and particularly relative to governance issues? Where do you see Egypt playing into that, and has it been a discussion with ILRS countries?
Yes. I think the way forward, and that's what we really experienced firsthand, that in order to grow and in order to really have an impact on this vast growing field of space, there should be the multilateral collaboration, regardless of politics. So we deal with all countries across the world neutrally, without any constraints and without any sensitivities. We have lots of collaboration with Europe, with the States, with China, with all over the globe. And this actually helped us to run quite quickly with the development of the small scale that we are working on for developing our needs through space by developing some sort of satellites and some sort of remote sensing instruments. So we have now a ClimCam that will be placed on the International Space Station this year. We are working on the remote sensing camera with China within the International Lunar Research collaboration. And actually this will help us to use our knowledge that we develop for the satellites to do more exploration for the moon. So we could see the effect of the multilateral collaboration and how it can make things much more effective and much more realized. So I think this is very, very important to collect all the knowledges from different places, because at the end of the day you will formulate your own stuff, but you need to get the inputs from different parts of the world, especially if you are talking about the communication across the moon, for instance, and the parts that are not easily accessible. How are you going to do this unless you have the real multilateral collaboration and having the different countries collaborating in a very constructive way so that you can have things done, similar to what have been done in the GNSS and similar. So I think this is unavoidable now to have this type of collaboration, putting all politics aside and just look at the sustainable, peaceful, safe use of space through getting all the stakeholders working together. And that's the spirit of COPUS at the end of the day. So all those members are sitting together for the sake of having a peaceful, safe usage for space. So that's in a nutshell how it works, and that's what we have seen in our experience in developing our space activities in Egypt, which have been done in a very short period, that we have lots of outcome now getting out of this.
You say the sky is no longer the limit for the ITU.
Yes.
So we need
Right.
to bring those frequencies.
Upper, yeah.
And ultimately, we're all signatories to the Outer Space Treaty, so we all have that shared goals and objectives and look forward to achieving them. Ron, one of the important goals and objectives of business is to make money. It wouldn't be a space panel if I didn't use the old cliche, no bucks, no Buck Rogers. And iSpace made history, sending the first private sector rover to the moon. Could you talk to us a little bit about the business case? How does one make money on the moon?
Yeah, so what we're trying to do at iSpace, what we are doing at iSpace, is creating, basically lowering the barrier of entry for commercial companies, for governments that don't have the capability to launch themselves into space, to be able to lower that barrier so that we could start bringing our innovation that gives us the lives that we all live right now, and send that out into space, right? To be able to create all of those centers of excellence, those centers of commerce that are on there. So obviously we've talked about in situ resource utilization. That's a very big part of what we're doing at iSpace. Being able to provide the mobility there, being able to provide surface mobility in particular, and also observational capabilities from lunar orbit to also help with that, and to be able to find those resources and to make use of those resources. So we have a multi-decade, pronged approach to how we're going to help create the infrastructure for a permanent human presence. The first step is mobility, including surface mobility, to be able to find those resources that we're going to hopefully be able to use. We also are very, very strong proponents of science on the moon and being able to enable that, to be able to provide, first of all, the ride to the moon, ride to the lunar surface, and then the ride to wherever on the moon folks need to be to conduct their unique science, right? Because that's going to be for the benefit of all as well.
Yeah, and I think it's so important that we all need to do a better job explaining the benefits of space to the world and people in general. I think we have an experience in commonality that when I was at NASA, I was being interviewed by a BBC reporter who asked me, how can you justify the billions you've spent on space when we have existential threats like climate change here on Earth? That's what I had to say. We wouldn't even know about climate change if it wasn't for space. And by the way, we're having this conversation on a cell phone through telecommunications. So I hope that we can all, as a community, commercial, private sector, government, talk about how space is going to improve life on Earth, going to the moon, going to Mars, and going beyond. And
I think the challenge with that is that we've been having that discussion for 20 years. And so we really need to make progress on it. The public at large still does not have the appreciation we do of how much space affects their daily lives. But a microcosm of that conversation that I've had, in a couple of cases I've been with senior space officials in different countries, and what they'll say is, when I talk to the Prime Minister, Kevin, I can't use technical space terms. Well, if you do, you're not going to get the funding, because what you realize is the senior politicians, whatever, they have a lot of things they have to invest in. You have to make the effective case for why the extra dollar, the extra euro, the extra whatever is going to space.
Yeah, and let's all drop the acronyms, because we all suffer from it. I'm as guilty as anyone with my ILRS without explaining what that is. So I think we can eliminate acronyms. We can reach the people. And per the previous panel, nothing but bias when it comes to Redwire. Again, as we're developing biotech in space, the microgravity research and development, people understand they need a meniscus. For those of you who weren't at the previous panel at Redwire, we printed a meniscus in space. We're flying drugs for diabetes, for heart disease, for cancer. These are things that are fundamental to people and life on Earth, very personal, very visceral. And I believe as the field migrates and evolves from more science, technology to biotech, that narrative will become much stronger. And as we look at that brave new world, Aarti, of private sector becoming even more involved than we are today, that's a real challenge with the United Nations structure, and domestically we have the same issues, that space was about governments. Kevin has noted, Ron, how UN COPUOS has already done a great job of reaching out, of trying to involve the private sector. What actions do you think need to be taken to effectively integrate private sector development and make sure that we move forward to the moon and beyond together, government and private sector hand in hand?
Me?
Yes.
Yeah. So you should know that there has been a concrete proposal received by the STSC, the Scientific and Technical Committee of COPUOS, in the last 2 weeks, to set up an action team to consult on a mechanism for lunar activities. It's very concrete. It's really proposing that we get a handle on sustainable moon operations, so coordinating missions in advance, sharing data that comes from missions, giving opportunities for partnerships. And when we say partnerships, automatically we don't just mean between nations, but also with private sector. So the way COPUS works is we have the plenary in June, we have the scientific and technical committee in February, and in April we have the legal subcommittee. Obviously there's legal issues too, so this proposal has gone through the STC. They've agreed that it's important, we need to move forward, so now it's going to the legal committee. We hope that COPUS in June, under Sheriff's leadership, will sign that off, and then we will actually get cracking on the work. You know, it's too easy to think that our government is stuck because of the geopolitics, nothing advances, and that you think that the answer lies in industry. It doesn't. Just because questions are tough, it doesn't mean that you can't advance on them. I mean, people look at COPUS and say there's a complete inability to arrive at global consensus on a new treaty, we need binding rules. We already have consensus on the long-term sustainability guidelines. We already have global consensus. We need to stop talking about the problems and talk a lot more about the solutions and the actions that need to happen next. And my hope is with this action team, with the new flavor that we are bringing by introducing industry and just trying to foster a more collaborative spirit and bring back the Vienna spirit, as it's called, that we will actually make some progress here.
And part of the reason we don't need a new treaty is because the existing treaties are so effective.
Absolutely.
I give a great deal of credit to those who crafted the Outer Space Treaty, because over 60 years old, doesn't look a day over 35, that treaty. I mean, it really, its goals, its objectives are as relevant today as they were in the 60s. Where it falls off a little bit is that we need details in terms of how we implement those goals and objectives, and I believe that's what the Artemis Accords, ILRS, are attempting to do, and then those will flow up to COPUS. But again, as a recovering attorney, let's get back to money. Yeah. So Kevin, could you talk to us about what you think the vision for the lunar economy is in space? How are dollars going to be generated? What does business look like in the moon 10, 20 years from now?
So I think it looks similar to what we see today. In the first panel, I mentioned the three market segments that we see going to the moon. The first being the infrastructure builders, the second being the explorers, and the third being sort of a catch-all category of people that will do things that lie beyond that, or do things better on the moon that we haven't been able to do so well on Earth. And so I think in the early instance, we'll see business the same way. There is a thread that has run through this entire conversation, though, that I need to foot stomp, which is the place that we need to focus for the moon is going to be on the talent issue. By definition, this comes up when you're talking about moving into biotech. It comes up when Artie talks about bringing the private sector in. What we have to realize for the moon is that, and really all of the space economy, is that we have, by definition, we have a need for all of the high-end technical talent we can possibly get our hands on. But it doesn't mean that we should not attract, and we can attract at the K-12 levels, people from all walks of life, because business on the moon is going to reflect all of the disciplines that we have here on Earth, not just science and technology. I know you've heard this story because I've told it before. When we were at Commerce, we held an event for we held an event on the space economy, overwhelmingly populated by scientists and engineers. And a woman walked in and she said, "I'm a chef." And people looked at her like, what is she doing here? Why did she come to this event? This is a space event. And she said aloud, "I understand that food tastes terrible in space, and it's going to be my job to make it taste a whole lot better." And if you understand that story, you understand that we're going to need people from every walk of life to be part of the lunar economy and the space economy beyond.
Absolutely. I'm a recovering attorney, and there was a spot for me in space. But Ron, does food really, firsthand experience, does food taste terrible in space?
Some of it does, but I want to, if I can I piggyback on that?
Please.
Because we've talked a lot today about the commercial benefits, the scientific, why go to the moon, right? Why do we go to space, right? And I just want to, if I can, just a quick story. I know we have just a few minutes, but one of the main reasons we go to space, and especially go there with humans, is because it changes our perspective. It changes the way we see ourselves. And to illustrate that, my last mission was about 6 months long. And when the mission was over, my two Russian military officer crewmates and I got into our Soyuz spacecraft. We undocked from the space station. We did a couple of laps around the planet. And we had this fiery, violent ride through the atmosphere at 8 kilometers per second. The parachutes opened. It threw us all over the place. Eventually, we smashed into the ground. And we hit so hard that our capsule bounced, and it rolled and it flipped over, and when it finally came to rest, it was laying on its side, and my window was now pointed down at the ground. And out of my window, I saw a rock, a flower, and a blade of grass. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm home. And what was really interesting about that fact, I was home, but I was in Kazakhstan. So to me at that moment, home wasn't just, Houston, Texas, where my family was waiting for me to return. Home was Earth, right? Someday, some astronaut's going to tell that same story, but they're going to land on the moon, and they're going to say, I'm home, because they're on the moon, because we have expanded that radius, and that's what space does. Space makes you realize that when you have the opportunity to look back and see the planet and see the true unity that we as a species are called to, you realize that all these things that we fight over, all these things that we think are so important, all these things that we quarrel over blur into insignificance from that vantage point.
Inspirational, Ron, and it's up to all of us in this room, this panel, to make that dream a reality. That should be our goal leaving this room. Sharif, final comments before we break? Any extra thoughts?
Yeah, it's a very interesting domain to explore the space, and how can you really benefit out of the space, and how can you really impact the development of everything when you look at the Earth from the space. So I fully agree with you when you just have the big picture, and it's really reflected in all the affairs that we are doing. In agriculture, in urban development, in all the details that, the day-to-day details. If you just inject the space data there, it's completely different. So I think space makes a huge difference for humanity, and that's why we have to keep it safe and sustainable. Otherwise, we will lose a lot.
Absolutely. Ari, final comments?
Let's not do to the moon what we've done to Earth. And let's not see the moon as plan B. We still have to fix Earth.
Kevin?
Welcome to the space economy, everyone. You essentially challenged us, and we're only 5 people, to make this happen. These are the folks that are going to make it happen.
Absolutely. Well, it's quality 5 people we got here.
Oh, fair enough.
And the audience. Well, thank you all
Thanks,
so
everybody.
much for your time. This has been a wonderful dialogue. Let's have a round of applause for our panelists. And again, I can't help but say, since we are in United Arab Emirates, the future is a bit uncertain, but with the contribution of UAE of airlock to the gateway, I know one thing: the road to the moon goes through UAE. So thank you for your support of the lunar movement.